What does it take to start a country? For the United States, it began with a breakup letter, a really, really famous breakup letter. Welcome back to the Citizens Playbook. I'm Joe Henning. Last week, we talked about why civics is the essential user manual for our society. This week, we're examining the document that provides the moral and philosophical vision for the entire American enterprise, the Declaration of Independence. In our eventual rulebook, the Constitution is the how of America. The Declaration of Independence is the fundamental why. To help us unpack it, we're honored to be joined by Dr. Stan Deaton, senior historian at the Georgia Historical Society. Dr. Deaton, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to the conversation. Before we dive into the text itself, could you set the stage for us? This wasn't a sudden decision, but a slow burn of escalating frustration. What was the unique mood and tension in Georgia leading up to 1776?
Well, Georgia was the youngest of the 13 American colonies on the mainland, and it had only been a royal colony since 1752.
Okay.
So what that meant in practice was that, let's say early 1770s, when the Revolutionary Movement really took off, Georgia had only been a royal colony for 20 years. And so there wasn't an entrenched governing elite here, which was both good and bad. It meant that there was kind of an opening for a lot of people like Button Gwinnett, who were sort of people on the make, who could sort of break into politics and use this cataclysmic event as the opening for them to get involved. But also, what it meant was that Georgia was also physically removed from the center of gravity, if you will. If Philadelphia is the center of gravity, if you think about it that way, it was an outlier. And so we tend to think of Georgia, especially as you go into the antebellum period and later, as kind of being more conservative and more of a states' rights place. But at this point, Georgia sent, where even though he couldn't get their stuff together enough to send delegates to the First Continental Congress, for instance, in 1774, and even to the second until later, they did send word that essentially they said, and I'll paraphrase here, we understand what's going on, and we understand that it's a continental movement, and we are with you. We are with you in spirit. We are with you as a people. We understand this is bigger than just one colony or something like that. So as the independence movement gained strength, Georgia was certainly moving in the same direction as the other colonies. John Adams famously said independence was requiring 13 clocks to all strike at the same time. And Georgia was one of those 13 clocks, and it struck when the others did.
Well, and it's interesting to have that perspective now. Thank you so much, because with the relative infancy of Georgia, I would say with the rest, they had a royal governor that was deeply respected.
Great point.
So did that play a bit into how hard they wanted to try to get to Philly?
Well, it certainly played a role into he did everything he could, again, to use more modern terms, I think, to throw a monkey wrench into everything. He did what he could to slow down. I think revolutionary fervor. He blamed South Carolinians for sort of dragging Georgians or encouraging Georgians to go places they wouldn't really.
So that's nothing new. We still blame South Carolina.
We still blame
whatever.
South Carolina for all of our problems. That's right. Yeah, especially down here on the coast. And there's this tension, right, between Charleston and Savannah. There always has been.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're absolutely right. James Wright was the third, and as it turns out, final royal governor. He had been on the job since 1760. He owned an immense amount of property in Georgia. He owned a lot of enslaved people. He was heavily invested. He had negotiated treaties with indigenous people to the west. He wanted Georgia to expand. He wanted people to come here and settle those areas. And so he saw all of this as a huge mistake. And he let Parliament know after the passage of the Stamp Act in 1765. He saw it as his duty to carry out the law, but he also let them know through back channels that he thought this was a huge mistake they were making. And then to sort of insist, even after it was repealed, that, hey, we have the right to govern for you people in Georgia and all the other colonies, we in Parliament. And he did what he could both to uphold the law and to tell the rebellious Americans, hey, you are going to basically destroy everything going down this road. You need to follow the law and follow your king and follow Parliament. And it just got away from him eventually. It just outran him. But he did more probably than any other colonial royal governor to hold off revolution as long as he possibly could.
Okay. All right. So let's turn, if we can, to those the unalienable rights. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. From a historical perspective, how revolutionary was it to declare that these rights pre-exist any government, completely challenging that divine right of kings that we were found, that originally settled in?
Yeah. Well, you've touched on, as they decided that they needed to write out the reasons for the separation. They understood that this was a momentous occasion. They understood that they needed to justify it to a skeptical world. And it was a confluence of things that happened. This was right in the middle of the Enlightenment, where people like Thomas Jefferson and Ben Franklin and Adams and Benjamin Rush all believed that, human beings had the potential to do enormous good, and that a government could be created that would tap into that impulse. And so when they got ready to write the Declaration, it could have been, and at a different time period, it would have been nothing more than a list of grievances against the monarch. He did this to us, and he did that to us, and we don't like it, and we're going to break away. But instead, in that preamble that you referenced, they took the whole thing out of the realm of squalid, petty politics and put it out on the high plane of philosophy and said that, as you said, that human beings have certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, or as John Locke would have said, the pursuit of property, and it was changed for a very good reason. But also that governments could be instituted again to tap into that impulse. It's a very positive and a positive statement. And make no mistake, Jefferson was assaulting when he said that the people who govern do so with the consent of the governed. He was assaulting the notion that had governed mankind since the beginning of time, which was that some people were put here on earth to serve other people, men and women. Yeah. There was a natural elite, and they were always going to govern, and everybody else below them was there to serve them. And the Declaration was a frontal assault on that notion. It was at the time revolutionary. It remains so. The idea that all men and eventually, of course, women are created equal of all races. Humankind is created equal, and they are born with certain rights, not given rights by governments or kings or monarchs or priests, as Jefferson would have said.
I want to stop a second because I just had this epiphany that, as much as we remember learning all of this from Schoolhouse Rocks and school and all of that this truly was an aspirational moment and one of the greatest ones in recent history, where it was flipping it on the side and saying, just because I was born here doesn't mean that I have to stay here. And so that aspiration that we see 250 years later is still there, but it's still that positive side. And like you said, not just raising grievances to be solved, but actually looking at how do we solve them. Yeah.
And the idea that power flows upward from the people, and that those people give certain limited powers to their governors, and I use that word to mean all those who governed over them, and that they did not have just sort of arbitrary and capricious right to do whatever they pleased, that ultimately you were responsible to those people who put you there. And so to this day, what I tell people is that everything government does at every level, whether it's local, like where you are, whether it's our state government, whether it's the federal government, it's everything they do is done in the name of the people. And the people have a right to know what is being done in their name. And I understand that, one of the things that's happened over the course of American history are things like national security and executive secrecy. But still, it's our job as the people to always remind our elected officials that what they do in the name of the people. You know this well. And so it was aspirational. It remains so, and it remains a goal. I mean, let's face it, all governments have secrets. All governments want to do things just because they want to do them, whether it's pave a road or build a fence or anything else. And so there's always that tension. In some ways, the Declaration and the Constitution are an invitation to an argument because that's what we Americans like to do. But it was there from the beginning. That tension was inherent in these documents.
Wow. We're probably, I know we're a little more than halfway through the production, but so far this has been the most interesting and learning conversation yet. So I appreciate that.
Good. Thank you.
You had mentioned Button Gwinnett earlier, and he was one of the three gentlemen that were sent for signers to put their names on this document. What do you know about these men, and how did that resonate? How did these grievances resonate most deeply with the residents of Georgia?
It's funny. The three people who signed the Declaration of Independence from Georgia, none of them were born here. I think that alone tells you how fluid Georgia society was at that time. And as I said, the door was open for people to rise in society. Button Gwinnett was 30 years old when he came here in 1765. He had failed at everything he'd ever tried, including when he got here. He tried to be a businessman. He tried to be a planter, and nothing worked out for him. The Revolution created an opening for him to get involved in what was then called St. John's Parish. It's now Liberty County, just south of Savannah, which turned out to be a little more radical than the more conservative Savannah merchants. So that provided an opening for him He wanted to really go into the military. He wanted to be the leader of Georgia's Continental Battalion. That is the battalion raised to
Mhm.
serve the Continental Army. He was voted down for that, and he had to accept what he and probably everybody else considered a secondary role. That is, election to the Continental Congress. And I
Wow.
think it gives us insight that they all sort of saw the real action as being on the scene where they were, like in Georgia. Jefferson wanted to get back to Virginia because they were creating a new constitution there. So, in some ways, now we look at the Continental Congress and the quote signers as kind of the all star team, right? That's the Hall of Fame.
Right,
Those are
right.
the founders. They didn't necessarily see it that way. The other two were George Walton, who came from Virginia. He was about 26 years old. Young man. Again, the Revolution provided him an opening to sort of climb. And Lyman Hall, who came from New England, he was the oldest. He was 52 in 1776. He had been a lawyer. He was a medical doctor at that time, so
Oh,
he was
wow.
known as Dr. Hall when he got to Philadelphia. If you ever watched the movie 1776, he is the
Mhm.
only delegate from Georgia who's there at all. It's very ahistorical, but he's an interesting character there. So they came from different backgrounds. They were not necessarily friends. They were allies there, and they supported the cause of independence. Whatever they thought about it personally, we don't know. Their correspondence has not survived, but they did not in any way, Georgia did not in any way obstruct the move toward independence. They voted on July 2nd for independence. They voted on July 4th to accept the Declaration, and by August 2nd, they had all three signed it and come back to Georgia.
Dr. Deaton, then are those respective counties in Georgia, are they all named after these three individuals?
They are, and I'll tell you, that happened in 1818. It's very interesting. You will recall, I think, that in the 1990s, we got a sense that, hey, we're losing the greatest generation. The generation
Mhm.
that fought World War II, they're dying, and you began to see monuments going up in many different cities and all. That's when the monument in the World War II monument in D.C. went up about 20
Mhm.
years ago. There was a sense in the 18 teens that we were losing the revolutionary generation, that they were slipping from us. Now, by then, all three of those signers had been gone for more than a decade. And so when some Cherokee land opened up there in what is now Metro Atlanta,
Mhm.
the legislature took the opportunity, really for the first time, to honor Gwinnett, Hall, and Walton, who, as I tell people now, those are county names that you hear in traffic reports in Metro
Yep.
Atlanta every day. Traffic's backed up to Gwinnett County on 85 and that sort of thing. Or maybe you went to a various Gwinnett high school like I did. I went to South Gwinnett. It took me
Okay.
years before I realized there was a person behind that name, but he never got close to Gwinnett County. He never came close.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's when and of course, Georgia had many naming opportunities eventually with 159 counties, but those three never had monuments erected during their lifetime. Most revolutionaries didn't. They were just squabbling politicians to each other. We tend to look back and see them, and it began then in the 18 teens as extraordinary figures.
That's interesting. That gives another great perspective then on as you had said, the all-star team that we see when we see the signatures on the Declaration of Independence and that versus those that felt that they were doing the real work, staying back here,
Mhm,
fighting,
mhm,
doing what they needed to do back here. And so the visionaries didn't have that history that we see now.
mhm.
As the Georgia Historical Society works to preserve and teach this history, how do you advise citizens today to engage with the document?
Boy, that's a great question. So much, for Georgia at least, in this period, so much of the documentation we wish we had, like letters from these
Yeah.
three, is missing. I often get asked, how did Georgians react to the Declaration of Independence? And, I wish I knew. It was read here for the first time on August 14th, so a month later,
Yeah.
after the. So July 4th now is a big deal, and we all celebrate it. July 4th at that time was not celebrated in that way. They kind of went about their business that day. For many of them, they thought July 2nd was going to be the day that would always be remembered because that was the day they actually voted for independence. But they accepted the Declaration on the 4th, and then they adjourned. Jefferson went out and bought gloves and other things for people back home. Don't know what the Georgia delegates did. Don't know exactly what they thought about independence. They all understood in Congress, certainly, that they had bitten off a big thing to chew, if you will.
Yeah.
Now they really had to make good on this. And I think everybody understood the momentous occasion that this was a breaking away from something and starting something new, which turned out to be self-governing republics. Again, something new in the world. When I
Yeah.
talk about this to people, I always explain to them, even if we don't know exactly what these people thought and felt, the fact that we can look at what they created, even here in Georgia, which was a self-governing republic, something new in the world. They could have chosen another monarchy. They could have chosen a really strong emperor. They could have chosen a governor who had all this power, and they didn't choose any of those things. They said, here the people will govern. All 13 former colonies chose self-governing republics in one form or another. They looked different in their constitution. Some had two houses of the legislature. Some, like Pennsylvania, had one. Some didn't have a governor. That was a
Oh,
reflection
well.
of how they felt about the colonial governors and the great power that they had. Eventually, of course, they would all have governors. We know that, just like we do today. But I think that's the thing that, focusing on, looking at this great event that's coming up, the US 250.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the never lose sight of how extraordinary the idea was that people can govern themselves and they can do it without kings, without monarchs, without what Jefferson would have said, priests, nobles, or kings governing us because we were too stupid or too rambunctious or too rowdy or too uneducated or too unvirtuous,
Unlearned,
they would
yeah.
have said, to govern ourselves. That didn't mean that they didn't think we needed to have a strongly educated public. People govern themselves must, as James Madison said, arm themselves with the power that knowledge gives. And so that's when you begin to see push for public education, for instance.
Yep.
And so all of that went hand in hand. But I always encourage people to think, don't ever think this was inevitable, because there's still people who don't think we are able to govern ourselves,
Correct.
that we should be governed. We should be told what to do. And so, there's nothing inevitable about it, and keeping it. There's nothing inevitable about that either.
Absolutely. Let me ask you one final question, sir, if I can.
Sure.
And you had mentioned the 250th, so I want to pose this challenge to you so we can challenge those listeners. And how can we both celebrate the enduring power of these ideas while remaining completely honest about those deep flaws of the era?
Yeah, that's a great question. I always point out to people that you can be patriotic and still be critical. In fact, a
Hmm.
true patriot is critical, and you love your country, and that doesn't mean that you're not critical. It's the same way that you love your family. You love the people around you, but when something is not right, it's your duty to kind of point it out. And we can be honest about our history, and should be. I think let's leave the whitewashing and the censorship to places like North Korea and China and Russia.
Hmm.
We
Hmm.
have always been stronger than that. We are not a nation of children. We are, a self-governing republic. We can be honest and we can be strong at the same time. And I think being critical of your country doesn't mean you don't love it. I think just the contrary. It means you
Absolutely.
do. It means you do love it. And I think that often people think that the whole purpose of history is to create little patriots. And I think that does a disservice to the little patriots. I think that, my teachers and my parents were very honest with me. I can tell you the first time I went to the Jefferson Memorial, it was the year before the bicentennial in 1975. I was 10 years old. And I remember hearing my mother say, as we looked around at that monument to Jefferson, all those inspiring words, and she said all these words about liberty, but he owned slaves. And I never forgot that moment. And it was
Hmm.
what historians call the American paradox.
Right.
Slavery and freedom marched hand in hand from the beginning, and it is an integral part of our story. And trying to figure that out and trying to figure out its legacy and implications doesn't mean you don't love your country. It means that we here can be honest with ourselves and with the future. I think we owe it to all those people who lived through that to be honest. And so I think it's a great question. I think that we can honor the past, honor the people who created this great nation, and doing our job to pass it on to the next generation means being open and honest about all of the past. When you walk into a doctor's office and they say, "Give me your history," they don't want to just hear about how healthy you've been. It's like, well, there was that part where I had cancer too. And
Hmm.
even though it's been cut out of me, it's still part of my history. And that's what I say about this country. We've had to cut out lots of parts we don't like, and it's still part of our history. And we
Absolutely.
don't celebrate it, but we commemorate it and we talk about it and overcoming the worst parts and admitting we've still got a ways to go. It's all part of the grand narrative of American history, and I love it.
I can't think of a better way to end this conversation than on that positive note. I think the challenge to our listeners is, as you said, acknowledge the past, but keep it going, keep this grand experiment moving forward for the next generation.
Absolutely.
Dr. Deaton, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you, and I appreciate what the museum does for Georgia. And thank you so very much.
Been my pleasure. Thank you.
Dr. Deaton, this has been incredibly illuminating. The Declaration is not a dusty artifact. It's our national mission statement. It's the standard we hold ourselves to and the benchmark against which we measure our progress. Thank you so much for your time and expertise. But before we conclude, it's time for our weekly call to action. This week's action is simple but powerful. Find a copy of the Declaration of Independence online. We want you to read just the second paragraph, the one we discussed at the start of the show, out loud. Read it to yourself, to your partner, to your kids. It takes less than a minute. And as you read the words, think about what life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness mean to you personally in your life today. As a highlight for an extra step, read through the list of grievances. Do any of them feel surprisingly modern? Do they echo any current debates about government power? Reflecting on those words is an act of civic engagement in itself. And next week, we move from the why to the how. We'll tackle the instruction manual for the entire U.S. government. We're diving into the rule book, the U.S. Constitution. Dr. Stan Deaton, thank you again for joining us. Thank you for listening to the Citizens Playbook. We want to take a quick moment to extend a special thank you to Georgia Power for their generous support of this entire series. Georgia Power's commitment to our communities goes far beyond delivering reliable energy. They are actively investing in an informed, engaged, and empowered Georgia. Their partnership is what helps us bring these critical civic conversations right to your headphones. We are incredibly grateful for their support. We want to extend our sincere thanks to Dr. Stan Deaton for taking us on this journey through our national mission statement and for his dedication to preserving our history at the Georgia Historical Society. If you found today's deep dive into the Declaration of Independence valuable, hit the share button and pass it along to your family or local study groups. And join us next time as we open up the Rule Book. The Citizens Playbook is hosted by Joseph Henning and State Judge Stephen Knights Jr., produced by Trinity Archer. This has been a Henry Chamber Media production, copyright 2026.